Brothers and sisters, comrades, it is a very great privilege to welcome you all to Socialism 2015.
My name is Jawad Ahmed. I'm here, I'm as a speaker. I'm very pleased to be here. And in fact, I think it should be a good, big day for socialism, as I can see so many young people here. If I'm able to inspire just a few of these people to become really good socialists for the Socialist Party, UK, and for the CWI, and for International Youth and Workers Movement, it will be good for me and will be a big day for us.
Comrades, we are meeting today in historic times. This gathering comes in a crucial period for the workers' movement. During the 12 months that have passed since last year's socialism events, we have witnessed a further intensification of the terrible suffering heaped on millions of working class people, both in Britain and internationally. Capitalism remains a system of cruelty, of chaos, and of course of crisis. And we live today in an extreme society run by extremists. The Tories, who won the votes of less than a quarter of Britain's electorate last May, are claiming a mandate for a new round of cuts savagery. Meanwhile, in 2014, the proportion of this country's wealth owned by the richest 1% hit an eye-watering 55%. But I think even incredible statistics like that can sometimes seem a little dry or abstract. The Tories, their allies, and the right-wing media can often try and bamboozle us with energy spent in devising massage figures or doctored stats. But working class people understand what numbers like this mean in real life, because there's nothing abstract about crippling pay freezes, nothing abstract about £2,000 lost in tax credits, nothing abstract about queues outside food banks. In the last month, a new report has outlined the devastating situation facing young people. The next generation face a world in which they will have to work harder for less, and this fact alone is enough to condemn capitalism. Any system which offers to the next generation a worse future than that afforded to its parents does not deserve its continued existence. But the times that we live in are historic, not just because of the depth of the crisis, not just because of the levels of misery being inflicted on working class people. The last 12 months have been a time of suffering, yes, but they have also been a time of resistance, of transformation, and of renewal. The central theme of this weekend is that socialism is back. Back on the agenda, back on the lips and in the minds of many workers and young people. In September, we witnessed a political earthquake in Britain. This came in the form of the tremendous election victory of Jeremy Corbyn, which was on the back of an upsurge of anti-austerity feeling, of a deep desire for a break with stale, pro-cuts New Labour. But now the fight is on. The battle for Labour's soul is in process. And in this battle, as in every battle that we face, it's crucial that our movement and that our class is well armed. So, comrades, we are here this weekend to arm ourselves with ideas, with the rich experience of working class history, with the lessons of struggles taking place internationally, with the organisational tools we need, but above all, with the ideas of socialism and of Marxism, ideas that can change the world. Every one of the speakers on this stage has a unique contribution to offer us tonight. Each has experience and insight that can help us be armed for the struggles we now face. So to open tonight's rally, I'd like to invite our first speaker to take the floor. It's going to be Helen Pattison of Youth Fight Austerity. As many of you will have seen, on Wednesday, thousands of students marched on London streets. And what the press like to call the lost generation is clearly not resigned to its fate. So Helen's going to speak now about the situation facing young people and the fight back. Thank you.
The year I started my A-levels, the economy crashed. At university, I joined thousands of other students walking out of lectures, marching and protesting against the trebling of tuition fees. And when we left university, all that me and my friends could find were minimum wage jobs on 0-hour contracts. And it wasn't just us who were under attack. We saw jobs disappearing forever, pensions being cut, and services dismantled. I was asked once, on some protest, why I was a socialist. But capitalism has only ever let me down. As long as I've been an adult, this system has been in crisis. And over that time, the rich have gotten richer. In an interview last year, Sharma Sawant said, "People don't need convincing their conditions are bad. They need convincing that there is an alternative." And the struggles around the world, particularly of young people, for wages we can live off, against austerity and corruption, have shown the willingness of this generation to fight for that alternative. In America, the media have called my generation the generation of self-proclaimed socialists, because we are proud to wear the badge of socialist. The media there can't understand why young people have flocked to the rallies of grey-haired socialist Bernie Sanders. And here, the media is similarly confused with the response that Corbyn has had. One of his young supporters said, "People call him an old-fashioned socialist, but to me, his ideas are new." There is enough wealth in society for everyone to have a decent standard of living, but that wealth is hoarded by the 1%. Shared out and democratically planned, it would mean jobs and services and an education for everyone. The latest Tory budget was an all-out assault on young people who were kept out of the living wage, will lose all their housing benefit, and saw student grants scrapped. We must fight austerity. Capitalism is broken, and it will never work for the 99%. It must be changed. Since the Tory re-election, there has been huge enthusiasm for an alternative. On protests and at meetings, socialist ideas have been more popular just because capitalism offers us no future. Told to blame ourselves or blame each other, lucky if we're on a 0-hours contract, lazy if we're unemployed, and bad at budgeting if our poverty wages don't last the month. We're told that we've lived outside our means, even if we were teenagers when the crisis hit, hardly in charge of the economy. If capitalism can't afford us £10 an hour minimum wage or free education, if it can't afford a decent standard of living for working class people, we can't afford capitalism any longer. An alternative is possible, and that is why I'm a socialist.
Thank you very much for that, Helen. And just before we quickly move on to our next speaker, I want to make a quick appeal for solidarity, which links in with what Helen was saying. Many of us were inspired by the October student movement, which has taken place in South Africa. And that struggle, as many will know, has already won an initial victory in forcing the ANC government not to increase fees in 2016. But what is perhaps less well known is that on many campuses, workers have joined the students in protest. A key demand of the movement was an end to the outsourcing of university workers linked to the question of pay, terms and conditions. But that at the University of Johannesburg, police and security have been used to attack their own workers, and the university has obtained an order banning protests. And what's more, the university's management is refusing to negotiate with a democratically elected workers' committee, which is continuing the struggle. So our sister section in South Africa, the Workers' and Socialist Party, is appealing for letters to be sent to the Vice-Chancellor of the University, Iron Lester Rensburg, to protest against this outrageous treatment. And if you could please send them both to the university and to our sister section in South Africa. Okay, the next speaker I'd like to introduce is Chris Baugh. Chris is a Socialist Party member, and he is also the Assistant General Secretary of the PCS, a union whose members have been in the front line of the brutal Tory attacks. Recently, many of us have drawn inspiration from the fantastic victory of PCS members in the National Gallery. This is a strike that many of you will be familiar with, but perhaps what's a little less well known is the crucial role that Chris himself has played in assisting the National Gallery workers in this struggle, acting as the chief negotiator with management. With trade unions under attack from the Tories and PCS in the front line, we need more trade union leaders like Chris and his colleagues who are prepared to stand up for their members. So please give him a warm welcome tonight.
Chair, comrades, brothers and sisters, it's a great pleasure to accept the invitation to come and address the Socialism rally this year as a long-standing member of the Socialist Party, and before that, of Militant. And it always bears constant repetition, I think, in these times, to remember the leadership and heroic role that Militant played in Liverpool City Council. And it should equally be remembered, playing such a leadership role in the biggest and most successful mass campaign of civil disobedience seen in Britain for decades that defeated the hated poll tax and removed Thatcher from office. Now, waiting as we are for Osborne's comprehensive spending review, as we know, these struggles are not just a matter of historical record. These struggles hold important lessons for today. And one of the many reasons and examples for why I say that is that why else would we see a right-wing media in full throttle, arguably the most vicious anti-left propaganda I think I've seen for many, many years? Why else would they indulge in such a vicious campaign against socialists, where people who probably never read a line of Trotsky, know even less of what he contributed, bandy around words like trot and Trotskyists intended as some form of cheap abuse? Even Cameron in the House of Commons the other day, denouncing Andrew Fisher, who, interestingly enough, a revenge of the Blairites, been suspended from party membership, a former PCS officer, a good, decent guy, who's now been subjected to a campaign of personal vilification. And you even see people like, the John Cruddases of this world, apparently wandering around. He's a bit worried that the Labour Party might turn into a 1980s Trotskyist tribute band. Let me just say, prior to Jeremy Corbyn's election, I would suspect that might have been quite a good idea. But it's because of the struggles that we need to remember and we need to remind people of. It's because of those struggles and the support that they generated, it was that Militant was targeted. And as we pointed out at the time, the outlawing of Militant was about a concerted project to capture the Labour Party for the Blairites, to render it safe for capitalism, a project described by Thatcher herself as her greatest achievement. Now, as we know, Jeremy Corbyn, a stunning campaign and election victory. I mean, it warms the cockles of the heart after so much attacks on the left and the difficult period that socialists and the left have had to engage in over the course of the last few decades. But as we know, it taps into a deep mood beneath the surface of an anti-austerity mood But most importantly, it reveals in such a wonderful, tangible way the massive potential for winning mass support for socialist ideas. And they attack Jeremy Corbyn in this virulent way. And they subject him to this vicious media campaign. And yes, attempting probably at some point, unless they're stopped, some sort of very British coup through the Parliamentary Labour Party. But it's because of a mortal fear, not just of the Blairites, but the ruling elites in Britain, that socialist ideas can and will win popular support. And of course, it's why my own union, PCS, has been targeted. If you look at our track record, you know, a civil service public sector union, we organise in parts of the private sector. And I'm proud of the role, first and foremost, of our union fighting tenaciously at every step of the way to defend the paid jobs and conditions. And I'm proud of the role that we played in galvanising support for coordinated action and calling for concerted action against austerity. But I'm also proud of the role of our activists, the activist culture that we promoted in PCS, that is one in many respects. Leadership is important, decisive even, but without the bedrock, the network of activists and reps that we had in the union, we wouldn't have been able to sustain the things we have done. And that's not just me talking, that's understood by Francis Maude and the Tories, which is why they cut facility time, union time, by 50% of all of our reps. Why they produced one of the most incriminating anti-union documents you could ever read. It's on our union website, well worth a read. Produced by senior civil servants in the department that exists for collecting tax, who, in this document, set out how to achieve the organisational degradation of PCS by targeting its elected senior officers and reducing the influence of PCS in the workforce, in the workplace. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, of course, the most decisive attack we've had to deal with is the threat to our finances, a deliberate attempt by the Tories and the state to choke off union finances. Now, let me just say, we were confronted with what you might describe as the mother of all recruitment exercises. To protect the financial position, to fund our activities and our fight back, we were confronted with the reality of having to recruit over 160,000 members in the space of 6 months. Well, I'm proud to say we've, at latest count, and it goes up, we've recruited over 145,000 members back. That is the best answer to Francis Maude and those that would seek to undermine PCS. Now, I don't want to overstate or understate the problem. You could argue weathered the worst of the storm, but we're still in it. There's still a lot of work to do, but I'm absolutely confident that that sends a powerful message of the support that our members have for the union and the support that our members will show and will need to show in the fight against the destructive 24, 25, 40% cuts in departments that Osborne is now proposing. Now, we were targeted, of course, because the union stands in the way, because of our record. But again, we have to recognise we were also targeted because of our successes. The action that we see in the museums in Scotland and Wales, the action we've seen taken by members in Universal Credit, in DVLA, the action to stop privatisation in the land registry, the improved conditions we've won for some of the most exploited workers in call centres. And as has been referred to, the action, the historic strike of our members in the fight against privatisation of the National Gallery. Our members took over 100 days industrial action. 160,000 signatures were collected in support of it. We raised over £150,000 in donations from the wider public to top up the 50% strike pay of the members that were out on strike. Some marvellous and creative tactics deployed, not just in Trafalgar Square, but also within the gallery itself. This was a privatisation driven forward by Tory trustees, with the old director pushed aside. Now, I want to be absolutely honest that despite this magnificent campaign, we weren't able to stop the privatisation. Securitas took over that contract. But I want to point out that this was an example, and it shows in practice the powerful and important nuts and bolts job that trade unions can and should do. We secured the most solid protection on terms and conditions and recognition rights in any agreement that I've seen in recent years. And most notably, and I think most significantly, we secured the reinstatement of the sacked rep Candy Unwin, despite all of the attempts by the employer to block that achievement. This isn't just a result for our members in the National Gallery who go back to work with a stronger union and far more confident. One of the many significant features of this is that this points the way to the concerted campaign we now need to organise across arts and culture in every museum and gallery against the decimation of arts and culture in the UK, now threatened as a result of the massive cuts by this Tory government. But we also know that trade unions in general are targeted. The trade union bill, in the words of academics who had a letter published, the most serious academics in industrial relations, had a letter published in the media a few weeks ago, and they described this. The government trade union bill is the most significant attack on trade union rights since the anti-combination laws of the early 19th century. We already operate under the most, to quote Blair, the most repressive anti-union laws in Western Europe, in breach of ILO conventions, where law lords are pointing out, where law lords are making in the recent judgment, actually said that the right to strike in the UK is little more than a slogan or a legal metaphor. Now, I just want to say that the unsung work of the unions, which you never see in the media, the big and small achievements, the fact that you work in a unionised workplace, you've got better pay, jobs and conditions, but at 6 million strong, it's the biggest voluntary working class organisation in Britain, and they attack us not just because they look at the weakness of many of the union leaders, but they attack the trade unions because they fear its enormous latent strength, and that's a strength that PCS and every union serious about fighting not just union rights, but fighting austerity needs to recognise. And we cannot allow the TUC, we put the maximum pressure on them, but if they stand in the way, the unions that are serious about a fight should come together and call the necessary action, not just against the anti-union laws, but a serious campaign of sustained industrial action against austerity. Now, let me just say, to sum up, comrades, let me just say, I think we've mentioned Corbyn's campaign. It shifts the whole frame of the debate, whatever we think about that. It puts socialist ideas back on the agenda, ideas that can explain not just the nature of the economic crisis, but also that the economic and environmental crisis come from the same source, a result of an economic system that puts profit above social need and now threatens the very existence on the planet. Now, I just want to say, by way of summing up, with the Paris talks coming up, it's even more important that the trade union movement and socialists engage in the debate around climate change, where, to quote Shami Savant, who spoke at a big rally around the biggest climate march in New York of last year, where the richest 5 companies on the planet are fossil fuel companies that have the massive resources to tackle climate change. But no amount of evidence, as Naomi Klein and Shami Savant have said, no amount of evidence or reason will talk the big fossil fuel companies and the corporations to stop them exploiting every last drop of oil under the ground. This is the reality of international capitalism, where market is God and everything is sacrificed on the altar of profit. It will not end its addiction to oil and fossil fuels. Neither will it carry out the change as rapidly as needed, the coordinated democratic international planning that's needed to save the planet. And I would really just say, by way of conclusion, it is our role as part of the day-to-day fight to defend working class interests, to build a mass movement with working class interests at the heart of it. Without that, we will not be able to take the decisive action to protect the planet and build a just and sustainable socialist world with an ecological clock that is ticking, recognizing that capitalism will save its banks, but it won't save its planet. So let's commit to building up the strength of the British trade union movement, of building up a mass movement against austerity, of building support for socialist ideas, not just in the UK or in Europe, but internationally, and for socialist change and not climate change. Thanks for listening, comrades.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. Our next speaker is also an important activist in one of the largest and most potentially powerful unions in the UK. Suzanne Muna is a housing worker and is an elected member of the National Executive Committee of Unite. She is a Socialist Party member and has used her position on the Unite NEC to campaign for the union to take a fighting stand on all the industrial issues facing its members, and crucially, to raise the crucial question of political representation for working class people. So please welcome Suzanne. Thank you.
Comrades, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. It's certainly a great privilege to be here. I was elected to the Unite Executive Council for the London and Eastern Territorial seat in January. Unite is the biggest union in the UK with 1.5 million members, 300,000 of them in the London and Eastern region. Of the 64 members of the Executive Council, currently I'm the only Socialist Party member. I'm hoping that this will change in the forthcoming elections, hopefully not by me being thrown off, but because other Socialist comrades get on there too. Being a Socialist Party member active on various committees in the union means that you sometimes find yourself in a minority of one, and that's not always easy. But at the same time, there is a pressing need for socialist ideas and principles to be aired. Even in Unite, where important steps forward have been taken, the left still needs to be strengthened by militant workers and shop stewards and by a fighting industrial and political programme. This is the best way to keep up the pressure on the union leadership and to defeat the right wing who are again raising their heads. The Socialist comrades in Unite, as elsewhere, approach everything from the same first principles, whether it's grassroots activity or interventions in the many layers of the union machine. The principles in this context are disciplined member engagement so that we both influence and reflect the actual mood of members, maximum and true empowerment through the constant involvement of our members in decisions, full democratic accountability, not the fake version whereby members can self-determine, but only if it fits with the union establishment's agenda. An action steered by a broad political understanding, not driven by the fragmented and divisive narrative of the tabloid press. It is a totally different relationship between officers, elected officials and the membership than the servicing model which dominates trade unionism in Britain. To give a simple but practical example, when we went into a pay dispute at my workplace, as well as balloting the members, we got the members together to design the pay campaign. The campaign helped us win the propaganda war and the dispute, despite being the minority union and the only one on strike, and massively raised the profile of Unite. I'm lucky to be in a multi-employer branch where 4 of the branch committee are Socialist Party members. As a result of our methods, 4 of our workplaces have had successful strike action. 2 have won disputes on the basis of strike threats alone. We've published a housing manifesto and built bridges with community campaigners. We initiated a campaign for a sector-wide agreement on pay and conditions. We are proactive in training reps who between them cover around 2,500 members. We meet them in their own workplaces and place high expectations on them. Our developing profile as a militant branch serves as a threat to employers across the sector, with managers moderating their plans for fear of our retaliation. Of course, it's not without its setbacks. We don't win every battle, and we struggle against the sector's structure and the constant turnover and burnout of reps. But without the intensive frontline activity, we wouldn't carry the same level of authority or integrity as we do currently with our members and when we intervene in union committees, conferences and on the executive. While Unite is not the hostile regime some comrades face, it is also not above using undemocratic tactics and manoeuvres when it suits. Recently on the executive, for example, Unite's motions to the TUC were hurried through without real democratic input from council members, and we ended up with a weaker response to the trade union bill when Unite should have been leading the fight. But even as a small force, our interventions as socialists can sometimes produce results. By putting forward a branch motion for disaffiliation to the July Rules Conference, and by backing this up with arguing and voting against a blank cheque for Labour at the Unite Executive, it was possible to push McCluskey into warning that the union must do everything it could to get Corbyn on the ballot paper, or there was a serious danger that we would get what we wanted in the disaffiliation vote. He was right. The danger was real because we were the ones reflecting the actual mood of members on the ground. It's an example of a strategy that was followed through at every level of the union. And although we didn't get disaffiliation, it did bear a different kind of fruit, because without it, the push for Corbyn from an influential union would not have been so powerful. Comrades, if you're in a trade union, I would say that although it can sometimes feel like you are a lone voice, one voice is sometimes enough. I hope in the coming elections we will see more members of the Socialist Party active at the grassroots and on the executives of our unions. Our power is in the combination of our ideas and our methods. You'll be supported by comrades in other sections of your union, in other unions, and by the unceasing efforts of our party's industrial department. So please, join us, join the party, join the union, and get organising. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. The next speaker I'd like to invite to take the stage is someone who I think we are extremely privileged to be welcoming. Jawad Ahmed is a successful pop star, and he's also a socialist activist. He is renowned in Pakistan for both his songs and his politics, and he has travelled all the way to Britain to be here tonight. Jawad has a record of solidarity with the working class, the poor and the oppressed. And recently he took the initiative of launching the International Youth and Workers Movement, or IYWM. And the IYWM aims to build a mass movement involving students, workers, young people and peasants in Pakistan, and has recently launched in the UK, both to help build solidarity with what's going on back in Pakistan and to help organise to fight for the rights of workers and young people living in Britain. So please give an extremely warm welcome to Jawad Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In fact, my family told me not to read the paper tonight. But I guess you don't have to do always what they say. So actually, I've been given this courage because a lot of people here were reading the papers, So I would also do the same because it is more of a well-composed thought pattern that I can read out to you. Dear friends and comrades, my name is Jawad Ahmed and I'm a singer, musician and filmmaker from Pakistan and a socialist. I'm part of a political organization called International Youth and Workers Movement, which works with peasants, service and industry workers, students and youth. And I'm a member of its central committee. I became an egalitarian when I started reading my parents' books, who were both professors of political science. I started believing in human equality as I could see immense but different talents and abilities in all human beings, many of which sadly had no value in the market. I could see that people belonging to all parts of this world had similar basic needs, the fulfillment of which should have been the primary task of societies formed by humans. But I could see all around me that it was not happening. People all over this world were impoverished, unresourceful, and helpless in front of their governments, the ruling class, and the administrative and bureaucratic systems. I tried to find out the reasons for that and met all sorts of scholars and read all sorts of books. But it was after I started interacting with the working class that I found out the real truth, which was that until they were ready to organize themselves as a class, demand and struggle for their rights, and to rise and take over the world would not change. That was the time when, on the question of political economy, I became a scientific socialist and started reading Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, and others. It was, you can clap, I will clap with you. It was the science of economy and the economic question, having both its social and political implications, that needed to be studied and addressed by peoples of this world to be able to create a world where people were emancipated from the shackles of economic slavery and were free to practice whatever faiths, talents, and abilities and fulfill whichever needs, interests, and aspirations they had. I'm very pleased to be here today in front of so many like-minded people, the revolutionaries from all over this world who are struggling for the cause of scientific socialism. This is a good time in Britain, as with Jeremy Corbyn having been elected as the head of Labour Party, we can actually look forward to the revival of active left politics in Britain. I know it is more of a great challenge to the youth and public of Britain than to Jeremy Corbyn himself. But I somehow feel that if the socialist organizations here, especially the CWI and Socialist Party, who have very kindly invited me here, intervene profoundly in this historical process of organizing and revolutionizing the working class, students and youth, we might see a socialist Britain soon emerge from the corpse of the redundant, unproductive, and non-progressive global capitalism. We are all living in such an unequal world right now where only 80 richest people own as much wealth as 3.5 billion people, or half its population, own. A planet where only 100 richest people with their annual income can end global poverty 4 times over. And still, this world is full of misery, human suffering, and calamity. Global capitalism has destroyed the fabric of humanity and is subjecting human beings all over this world to worst kind of economic slavery, a material as well as a psychological condition in which you are a slave, but you don't know that you are. It is not capable of providing basic needs to people. Forget about freedom, benefits, facilities, opportunity, and choice. It is not easy to work in a third world country of first-class people, where crony capitalism is working at its best. The semi-feudal, semi-capitalist society with tribal pockets still intact in a lot of places, and where majority of the people are ignorant about what left-wing politics is, it is quite a challenge to build working-class movements there. In 1970s and 80s, the left politics and the leftists were very systematically crushed by the power of the state of Pakistan. Many of the left-wing activists, intellectuals, and politicians fled from Pakistan, and the rest who chose to be there also opted to become silent. Most of them became reformists and either started running NGOs or working with the corporate, social, and public-private sector. Politicians cannot just think ahead of themselves and are disillusioning the youth and masses with the superficial and intellectually shallow gimmicks and political tricks. They use, which is not very common here actually, they use, rather misuse religion and other cultural and social influences of an economically backward country to their advantage. Pakistan is a highly polarized society with a very poor working class, divided on the issues of religion, sectarianism, caste, ethnicity, language, and race. The state and condition of the working class is in shambles, and people are forced to work in fields, factories, shops, offices, and roads, sometimes in 6,000 rupees per month only, which is equivalent to 38 pounds a month. The minimum wage there is merely 82 and 94 pounds, which is actually announced by the governments per month. Can you even imagine how would you live in such an amount with your family and children? Well, they don't have to imagine, as they are actually living it. There are almost no trade unions there, except in a few industries of public and private sector, and only less than 1% of the total workforce is unionized. Pakistan is a very important country in terms of its geopolitical position and its history. The 6th most populated country of the world. One of the top 10 atomic powers of the world, and rich in almost all sorts of natural resources. It has been a battleground for the imperialist powers for decades. The turmoil-stricken country has had the worst anti-people civil and military governments running its affairs. Just like any other third world country, it has no national progressive bourgeoisie who can complete the historical social democratic tasks of building infrastructure and ensuring health, education, and social security to the people. The feudals, tribal lords, turned crony capitalists are utterly irrelevant to the wants of the society and to the natural and progressive growth of capitalism, which at least took place in advanced countries of the world, including Britain. But still I see only promise, hope, and struggle in its resilient people who have quite a few times surprised the ruling class there with their revolutionary struggles. International Youth and Workers Movement is going to launch a campaign for universal registration of the workers in Pakistan, and we will urge the government to register all sorts of independent, formal or non-formal workers, entitling them to the right of social security. For that, we will have to campaign against the exploitation of workers in the name of contract labor, which is being practiced by both national, multinational industries and companies, as well as almost all the government, social, public, and private sectors. It will be a huge campaign which will shake the whole economic structure of the society, let's hope so, and ensure the basic rights of the working class. I'm coming to the end now. International Youth and Workers Movement is also working in Britain to build a fight against austerity, cuts, inequality, and racism. Anyone who intends to join us in this struggle can contact Uthaya Sanan of CWI. We are conducting a session on that tomorrow, Sunday the 8th, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Institute of Education, Bedford Way. We'll be pleased if you can join us there. Socialism is life, as it ensures and guarantees livelihood, well-being, prosperity, and freedom to every man, woman, and child. It is the only answer to global menaces like ongoing destruction of environment, overproduction, arms race, and population explosion. And to all of us now who want to change this world on principles of human equality and equitable distribution of wealth and resources, in the words of Shakespeare, to be or not to be, a socialist is the question. Our collective affirmative answer to this question will create, form, and shape up the new, free, and full world. Otherwise, only barbarism will prevail on the planet Earth, which continues to this day. I not only hope, but believe that humanity's answer in the nearest future will be yes to this now existential question of humanity and to socialism. Thank you.
So before we move on to our next speaker, it's a real pleasure to be able to bring you a greeting from Sharma Sawant. who, as many of you will know, is the recently re-elected Socialist Alternative Councillor in Seattle. And I'm going to read her greeting. She says, "It is my pleasure to bring you all comradely greetings from Socialist Alternative in the US. Earlier this week in Seattle, we succeeded in winning my re-election as a Socialist Alternative City Council member. This is an historic achievement for workers in Seattle and indeed across America. An army of 600 working class volunteers and 30 unions beat the combined forces of big business and the political establishment that serves their interests. My opponent was backed by millionaire executives of massive corporations like Amazon and Alaskan Airlines, and every business which fought against the $15 an hour minimum wage which we campaigned for and won was backing my opponent in the campaign. By contrast, we ran a distinctly anti-corporate campaign, and we raised $500,000 with a median donation of just $50. The monumental scale of our grassroots campaign is a testament to the hunger of American working class people for a clear alternative to the bankrupt politics of both the Democratic and Republican Party establishments. And it also shows how Socialist Alternative has won the confidence of working people. In our 2 years on the council, we won not only a $15 minimum wage, but fought rent hikes in public housing and stood alongside a recent historic teachers' strike. Our success comes at the same time as there is a growing enthusiasm for the campaign of Bernie Sanders standing as a socialist for the presidency of the United States. His call for political revolution against the billionaire corporate class resonates with working class people, albeit in a corporate-dominated democratic presidential race. And this is a global phenomenon, as we have seen internationally with the election of Jeremy Corbyn and other examples in Europe. So I wish you every success with Socialism 2015 and with the wider struggle that you are facing against Tory austerity and Blairism. Solidarity. And I think everyone here will join me in sending back a message of solidarity and congratulations to Sharma and our American comrades. Our next speaker is someone many of us were lucky enough to hear speak at Socialism 2014. Paul Murphy is a TD or Member of Parliament for the Anti-Austerity Alliance in Ireland, and he is also a member of our sister party there. As many of you know, along with 22 others, Paul is currently facing criminal charges for a peaceful protest against the Irish Deputy Prime Minister, Joan Burton, last November. This protest was part of the mass movement of non-payment that has developed in the country, opposing the introduction of outrageous water charges. And the really vicious victimisation of activists and leaders like Paul is clearly a measure of the fear that exists at the heart of the Irish establishment right now. So please welcome Paul.
Thanks a lot, Claire. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, and then they attack you and want to burn you, and then they build monuments to you. It wasn't Gandhi who said it, as is often falsely reported. It was an American trade unionist, a guy called Nicholas Klein, in 1918, who summed up the long-standing strategy of ruling classes worldwide when faced with mass opposition. Well, the Irish ruling class and their mouthpieces, they don't ignore us. They certainly don't build monuments to us yet. Instead, they engage in unprecedented state repression and then attempting to ridicule us whenever we expose the repression that is taking place. And so if you listen to the mainstream media, the dominant commentators in Ireland, you would have the view that the notion of political policing in a democratic state like Ireland is absurd. Anybody who thinks that's happening is a Walter Mitty, delusional type character. You have to remind yourself of that it's a nonsensical idea whenever you hear that 188 people have been arrested in 1 year alone for protesting against the imposition of water meters to impose water charges on people in local communities in the last year. You have to remind yourself of it whenever in February of this year, for a whole week, we had dawn raids, 6, 8, 10 police turning up to people's homes and arresting people under suspicion of false imprisonment, arresting myself, 3 other Anti-Austerity Alliance members, other political activists, a whole number of school students, community activists, people involved in their local football teams and local communities because they were engaged in a peaceful protest. You have to remind yourself that political policing does not exist in Ireland whenever the Gardaí, the police, leak it to the media in a completely unprecedented way that we are going to be charged with false imprisonment before we find out about it or before we're charged because we participated in a protest, a sit-down protest that delayed the car of the Deputy Prime Minister for 2 hours. You have to remind yourselves of it when in the same precinct of the Gardaí, of the police, another left-wing TD and 12 other activists are arrested and are charged with lesser offences but are tried, or their trials begin, the court appearances begin on the same day as those charged in Jobstown. You have to remind yourself political policing doesn't exist. It's a nonsensical idea whenever you hear that the Anti-Austerity Alliance is the only political party to be denied the right to fundraise. We're not allowed to go door to door and ask for money for our political movement, unlike any other political party in the state. The reason given under the law is because the money would be used to encourage either directly or indirectly the commission of an unlawful act. And whenever we challenge it, and we get a written response from the police woman responsible for that decision, she literally says, nothing is left out here, the collection permit has been refused because I believe that the proceeds of the collection, or a portion thereof, would be used to facilitate protests sponsored by the Anti-Austerity Alliance. And for that reason, they try to starve us of the right to raise funds in advance of the election, a decision that we're currently challenging in the courts. And you have to remind yourself that political policing does not exist whenever you read headlines like this. Revealed, Garda team spying on water activists, which reveals an operation called Operation Mizzen, headed up by the Garda commissioner, the police commissioner's husband, a secret group inside the Gardaí which has spent 6 months monitoring the protesters, compiling profiles and gathering intelligence on their whereabouts, according to sources. Anti-Austerity Alliance TD Paul Murphy, who was arrested in connection with the notorious Jobstown protest, is understood to be amongst those profiled. And whenever we raised it again, ridiculed in the Dáil for raising it, but then subsequently the Minister for Justice, under pressure, confirmed that Operation Mizzen exists. But you have to remind yourself, even when we have people being rounded up in the morning, even when we have protesters facing life in prison because they were engaged in a protest that is now false imprisonment, even when the biggest left-wing movement in the country isn't allowed to collect money, even when we have the admission that the police are spying on public representatives and activists, you have to remind yourself that that's delusional, that political policing, in fact, doesn't exist. The reality is that political policing is not the exception. The reality is that political policing is the rule. Whenever the interests of the ruling class, of the capitalist class, of the 1% are challenged. Even just the last 10 years in Ireland provide numerous examples of this in action. From the Rossport Five, who spent months in prison, and numerous protesters, including myself and many, many others, were beaten by police in protests connected to Rossport, because we stood up against Shell and Statoil and the giveaway of our natural resources to these major multinationals and the building of an unsafe onshore refinery. Margaretta D'Arcy, who spent weeks in jail because she exposed the complicity of the Irish government in the US war machine through the use of Shannon Airport by US warplanes. The 23 bin charges protesters, including Joe Higgins and many other comrades, who were jailed because of their active opposition and organisation against the unjust double taxation of the bin charges. They all prove the point that fundamentally the police and the state function as an instrument of oppression of the 99% on behalf of the 1%. But it's a reality that isn't laid bare to the majority most of the time under capitalism. Most of the time, the 1% rely on ideology to cover up their rule. They rely on the ideology, above all, of the rule of law, and law being a neutral instrument that defends the interests of society as a whole that everybody has to obey. It's only at times like now, of mass opposition, mass resistance, mass activity by working class people, that the reality of the state and the hard element of the state comes out in full force to be seen. It was Howard Zinn who famously said that our problem is not civil disobedience, it's civil obedience. But from the point of view of the 1% of the elite in the Irish state right now, their problem is precisely civil disobedience. Their problem is the existence of widespread, mass civil disobedience, from the sit-down protests and the protests against ministers wherever they appear, to the anti-water meter protests, which have succeeded in keeping water meters out of huge working-class communities which are just no-go areas for Irish water. But above all, the mass civil disobedience of the massive boycott against the water charges, where despite incredible propaganda, incredible campaigns of fear, incredible advertising campaign, cold calls, lies and everything, 52% of people continue to resist, continue to boycott. A majority in Ireland are consciously engaged in breaking an unjust law, engaged in an act of civil disobedience. And that is a very scary thought for the establishment. When their traditional political parties are at about 50% in the polls combined, when historically they would have been 80, 85, 90%, and then you have mass civil disobedience, when a majority of people feel capable of judging for themselves that a law is unjust and a law should be defied. And they are trying through all of this repression to send a message to those people to get back in their boxes, to obey these laws, not to be attached to criminal elements like ourselves. Because it's that notion that people have the right to resist and the right to engage in civil disobedience and the right to break unjust laws that's an extremely dangerous idea. Because if we are to win, not just on the water charges, but on housing, on abortion, on strikes, on anything, you have to break their rules. Their rules are written by the 1% in order to protect the interests of the 1%. If you stay within the strict limits of the Industrial Relations Act, if you obey the injunctions that are given against striking workers, very difficult to win a strike. If you respect the right to property and to profit of the developers and the construction companies, very difficult to build a movement to deal with the housing and homelessness crisis that we have in Ireland. If you respect their backward laws, which restrict, for example, it make it illegal, subject to a jail sentence, to distribute simple abortion pills in Ireland, you can't build a radical movement to smash those laws and fight for abortion rights. But it's also true, on a broader level, that if you have a left government that doesn't break their rules, well then you can't break from austerity. That's the lesson that comes from Syriza, that if you stay within the rules of the EU and the Eurozone, which are the rules of neoliberal capitalism written down, if you pay the debt like you're meant to pay the debt, then you're in a straitjacket of austerity that you can't break out of. And that is why, precisely, the Anti-Austerity Alliance and the Socialist Party are in the sights of the establishment and are being targeted. Because we say unashamedly that we are for a radical, principled, anti-austerity and socialist movement based on working class people power. A movement that is not afraid to break unjust laws, which is why we championed above all the question of mass non-payment. One that fights for a left government with socialist policies. A left government that breaks out of the straitjacket of the neoliberal rules of the EU and the Eurozone and of capitalism itself. A left government which refuses to pay the debt that is not our debt. That reverses austerity measures. That breaks the power of the 1% by ending their control of the economy, by democratic public ownership and by planning. In short, a government that opens up a mass struggle from below, together with brothers and sisters across Europe and across the world, to transfer power from the 1% to the 99%, both economically and politically. Of course, they've made a mistake, and they're capable of making significant mistakes, to try to jail us and to try to repress us. It's a mistake because our response is not to cower and to apologize. We will be using the trials, which will be the biggest political trials in the state in 45 years, to put the Labour Party lies and to put austerity on trial. Instead of jailing our ideas, they're going to give us an unprecedented platform to get those ideas across. And in preparing our defence, for inside the courts, in a legal defence campaign, but above all for outside the courts, in a campaign of mass mobilisation and defence of the right to protest, we take inspiration from Scottish socialist John Maclean, who was jailed, imprisoned for his opposition to World War I and made a famous speech from the dock, where he said, "No human being on the face of the earth, no government is going to take from me my right to speak, my right to protest against wrong, my right to do everything that is for the benefit of mankind. I am not here then as the accused. I am here as the accuser of capitalism dripping with blood from head to foot." Thank you very much.
Thank you. And actually, we're going to be moving on now to our final speaker of the evening, our keynote speaker, Peter Taaffe. And to many of you, Peter will not need any introduction. He is the General Secretary of the Socialist Party. And since the Socialist Party's foundation, Peter has been central to developing its programme and organisation, to providing understanding and explanation of the situation facing working class people, and to offering the ideas needed to change society. But right now, I think it's fair to say that there is a spectre haunting the Blairites, and this is the spectre of Militant. For anyone who doesn't know, Militant was the Socialist Party's forerunner, and Peter Taaffe is a former editor of the Militant, and when you examine the records of that organisation, which of course, as Chris mentioned, was instrumental in many of the key battles against Thatcher, it's perhaps no surprise that this spectre is a frightening one for the right wing. Jeremy Corbyn's victory has undoubtedly opened up new opportunities for the workers' movement, for the left, and for our party. But as everybody knows, it offers fresh challenges as well. So to address these and other crucial questions facing our movement, I'd like you to please welcome Peter Taaffe.
Comrade Chair and comrades, what a splendid rally and platform we've had here tonight. We've had the genuine voice of the labour movement in Britain and the tremendous contribution of Comrade Jawad, representing, if you like, the unheard masses in the neo-colonial world. Now, we called this event Socialism more years ago than I like to remember, for a very special reason. Because after the collapse of Stalinism, the ruling class conducted an unprecedented campaign to discredit socialism, to discredit the class struggle, and an attempt to weld the working class in defense and in support of its system. In reality, what happened in Eastern Europe and Russia was not the discrediting of genuine democratic socialism, but really of a perversion of that marvelous idea in the form of the horrible caricature of Stalinism. So therefore, we pledged ourselves to discuss the perspectives for socialism at this event, while at the same time working tirelessly to mobilize the working class in action against the system. And the result of that can be found in this meeting here tonight. And this is just the start, by the way, because in the movement that's going to open up, there will be tremendous opportunities for the ideas of socialism, of solidarity, of changing the world. And in particular, we were looking to the new generation, which is gathered here tonight representing the best of the youth and of the working class. We knew that once the situation changed, they would be the worst affected and they would move into action. We've seen a re-emergence, haven't we, of the class struggle in a splendid form, in the more than 30 general strikes in Greece, in the movement in Spain, in the tremendous movement in the neo-colonial world in South Africa, where once again, and I was there with Alec Fraser last year, in which our section has intervened in the student movement and made tremendous progress. The students and the strike of the students against the same conditions that young people in Britain are fighting against, and that, of course, is crippling tuition fees. And then we've had the election of Jeremy Corbyn, and allied with that, as has been mentioned previously, the marvelous victory of Sharma Savant in Seattle, which is a symbolic act of the enormous change that is taking place in America. We said not so long ago, America is really the anvil upon which the fate of humankind will be ultimately fashioned, and the beginning of the creation of a force that can achieve that task has been shown in the victory of Sharma. She lit up this rally last year, and that is allied to what is happening in the movement in and around Bernie Sanders itself. The ruling class and capitalism have conjured up forces now that will not be prepared to go back to sleep. This movement, together with the movement in Europe, the creation of Syriza, of Podemos, did not drop from the sky. It symbolized the deep dissatisfaction, both with crisis-ridden capitalism, the horrors of the neo-colonial world in Japan, in India and elsewhere, and also the intractable crisis of capitalism, including the crisis of climate that Chris Baugh mentioned in his contribution itself. This system is a system that is sick unto death. It is not an episodic crisis. It is a systemic crisis. It's a structural crisis of the system. All the parties that stand on this system are in crisis today. Above all, the bourgeois parties, the capitalist parties, but also the Social Democrats, or to be more precise, the ex-Social Democrats. And let us remember, what we call reformists have not always betrayed the working class. There have been periods in the past, in the Labour government of 1945 to 51, when they carried through a quarter of a revolution, if you like, with the nationalisation of coal, steel and so on. the creation of the National Health Service itself. But now the Social Democrats everywhere, not just in Britain, are the agents of counter-reforms, are presiding over cuts in the living standards of working people. If you take the present situation in Greece, the equivalent unemployment there is equal to 8 million unemployed in Britain. We have an unparalleled collapse. And as a matter of fact, one of the leading people in Europe for the capitalist parties, Herman Van Rompuy, former head of the European Council, and a man not given over to exaggeration, said about the crisis of 2007 and 2008, we were a few millimeters away from a total implosion. If you think that is bad, then just contemplate the situation that could develop in the future. But let me make one thing clear here tonight. Socialism, Marxists are optimists down to the marrow of their bones. We have enormous faith in working people to struggle. The picture is not one just of retreat. It is of victories as well, of the working class, which Chris mentioned, of the local government workers who struck in Britain in the last period itself. No publicity is being given to it. But if you look what the soothsayers of capitalism are saying, they spelt it out. This is what at the Davos Conference of the Rich in 2012, the CEO of Prudential said the following: unions are the enemy of young people. The minimum wage is a machine to destroy jobs. Workers' rights and decent wages stand in the way of capitalism's revival. You have it from the horse's mouth. Paul Mason comments, who wrote a book on post-capitalism, drawing conclusions from this. This is the real austerity project, to drive down wages and living standards in the West for decades, until they meet those of the middle class in China on the way up. That's the program that they have for the working class and its allies worldwide. And we see the effects of this in Britain at the present time in the catastrophe of the steel industry itself. How rotten that the government has offered £9 million as recompense for the closure of virtually the whole of the steel industry itself. That's not equivalent for the transfer fee of a third division team in the Football League at the present time. The result, as one steel worker lamented, it means there are no jobs out there. There's no steel. There's no coal. There's no industry. There's no call for shipbuilding. Therefore, there is no future. That's what the leaders of this system, that's what the stewards of British capitalism have brought the economy to. Today we read the manufacturing industry in Britain now accounts for something like 10% of the economy, down from 36% in 1948, and that was bad enough. It gives you a frightening picture of the future of young people and of the working class so long as this system is maintained. If you go to the north, to Wales, to Scotland, to the areas of the south that have suffered, you will see a picture as if an army of Genghis Khan had raided and destroyed everything in its path. That's the legacy of Thatcherism. And what is the answer of the bourgeois, of the ruling class? You know, George Osborne is in favour of nationalisation. It's not true that he doesn't favour nationalisation. So long as it's a French nationalised industry, or it's a Chinese nationalised industry taking over British industry at the present time. The stage we've reached is the owner of Middlesbrough Football Club, who usually doesn't engage in politics, railed against the Tory government and condemned the Minister for the North as a clown. Unprecedented language to be used by someone of this character. And of course, it's not necessary to remind this meeting here tonight of the scale of the misery of working people, of food banks, of zero-hour contracts, and so on. And no wonder psychologists, for the first time in history, have actually marched in a demonstration against austerity, because they've been called upon to deal with the victims of austerity at the present time. The attacks on the hospital doctors. The Guardian on Thursday gave figures on the living standards of the Dockins: £25,000, £30,000 a year. In other words, relentlessly forced down to the living standards, if you like, of the more skilled workers in Britain at the present time. The police are in unprecedented revolt. By the way, the amount of attacks on civil liberties has given enough power in the hands of the capitalist state to establish a police state. The problem is even the police are in revolt against a police state, if you like. They're protesting against the latest legislation attacking democratic rights. And the ruling class and this government has no idea of how to escape from this situation. They've forgotten the first rule in holes. When you're in one, stop digging. Even though they were warned by their own side, with Tory MPs saying a revolt is brewing. Lawson even warned the government a revolt was coming. A former Chancellor, Tory Chancellor of the Exchequer. They thought through their fresh election victory, which is pointed out was a minority vote, they'd be able to put the boot into the working class. They came a cropper, but not through the disastrous House of Commons. It took a feudal relic in the form of the House of Lords dressed up in frocks to actually check the position of the Tory government itself. It's very opposite that a former Archbishop of Canterbury admitted in the course of the debate that he was literally as poor as a church mouse, and in the past he himself and his family were on benefits. They've been joined by people who voted Tory a matter of months ago. It was shown on Question Time itself. It indicates that this government and the ruling class are out of touch with the brewing revolt that is coming from below. And they should heed what has happened in Canada in the recent elections, when the Liberals were third when the election campaign started, and the New Democratic Party, allegedly close to the Labour Party, seemed to be in the offing to win a victory. But they came out for fiscal austerity, the Liberals came out for austerity, and they romped home. Or in Romania, in the last couple of days after a horrible accident in a nightclub, we also saw fire deaths resulting from that, and that was enough to bring down the Romanian government itself. This situation is preparing for the revolt of the working class, which in turn will put socialism back on the agenda itself. It was the factor, the most important factor in the victory of Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour leadership election itself. The victory itself reflected a swirling mood from below, a surging anti-capitalist, anti-corporate mood. These conditions have existed for 20 years, by the way. And Jeremy was propelled, raised up on the shoulders of this movement into the leadership of the Labour Party itself. I have to say that I'm very disappointed that John Lansman, one of the leaders of Militant, turned down the debate that he'd agreed to with me tomorrow. I also have to add, this is the second time it's happened to me. Robert Service, if you remember, when I wrote a little critical article of him because he denounced Trotsky, also turned down a debate with me. We will go anywhere and debate with anybody. I went to the Oxford Union 2 years ago. I had a millionaire on my side, by the way. That doesn't happen very often. And on a slogan or on a proposition, the capitalism has let down the poor. We got the motion passed in the Oxford Union. And the millionaire agreed with me because he thinks that capitalism has gone too far. It's quite incredible for the arguments that were used by John Lansman to turn down a debate. What has he got to fear from you or from me in an open and democratic discussion? He said, incredibly, that the Sun newspaper, because they publicised the debate, and what do you expect? The Sun was only acting in character, trying to make mischief, trying to play up any differences in the Labour movement. What's new? You expect that from the Sun. If they said Peter Taaffe was a potential Prime Minister, then we'd have to worry about it. But they were acting in character. And what is the Sun's motto? It's very simple. I've said this before. When we had a debate in the 1980s, I said it to Sun journalists. Sun editors and Sun writers have a very simple model, if you like, or a saying. Make it simple and make it up. That's their credo. And then he made an astonishing point. He said, well, the Sun can set the narrative for the Labour movement and the working class. By the way, he hasn't learned a lesson from Jeremy Corbyn's campaign itself. Didn't the Sun denounce Jeremy Corbyn and every other capitalist newspaper, and yet he won? Why? We had the Sun against us in Liverpool, as has been already mentioned. We had them against us in the whole of the capitalist press during the poll tax struggle. And we conducted that battle, by the way, without the leaders of the Labour Party, without the leaders of the trade unions, without even other left organisations who boycotted the struggle. It was us and the working class that inflicted a powerful defeat on the Tory government and forced Thatcher to resign. Now, there's some speculation in and around this issue that the Socialist Party are ambivalent about this development around Corbyn and are hesitant in our approach. On the contrary, the fact that we were prepared to debate it openly shows that we were straightforward on this issue. Nobody, least of all Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters, anticipated and recognised this development. They didn't think they were going to win. This is a spectacular example of the law of unintended consequences. The right wing forced through the change in the rules to dissipate the collective voice of the trade unions by allowing ordinary people to join the Labour Party for the election itself at the cost of an email, which is the equivalent, as Dave Nellis continually points out, not the cost of a pint, that's outside of London, but half a pint in London itself. The masses seized hold of this spontaneously from below and lifted Jeremy Corbyn onto their shoulders into the leadership. We believe, by the way, this is a movement still in flux. We think it's wrong to re-affiliate, for the unaffiliated unions to affiliate to the Labour Party at this stage when the issue is being debated. What does that mean? It means the unaffiliated unions give money that they're already given to Corbyn's campaign. They give money to the machine, the Labour Party machine, that, let us remember, excluded from the election 50,000 people, including Mark Savoca, was excluded from the election itself. And now we have the fresh lesson of Andrew Fisher and also the vote in the parliamentary party in the last couple of days when the right had a clean sweep on the shadow committees themselves. The argument has been put to us, well, you're standing on the sidelines. We are not standing on the sidelines. We are prepared to join the Labour Party. But are Jeremy, John MacDonald, John Lansman, and the forces behind them prepared to confront the right? The Blairites, to call them by the right name, the 4.5% are calling the tune. Tristan Hunt went to a debate in Cambridge, and he said in that debate, the Labour Party is shit. It's far worse than what Andrew Fisher said. The Labour Party is a sect. And he said, you are the 1%, you should come in and rescue the Labour Party. You couldn't have a clearer example of what the right wing are about in this situation. And what is Jeremy and what are the left preparing to do about this? While the right are preparing for civil war, and it's going on now, they talk about peaceful coexistence. It's not possible when such a situation exists, when the trade unions have been elbowed aside by Blair, when we had the Iraq War, and so on. In a sentence, are Corbyn and MacDonald prepared to lean on the joiners, to lean on those workers who are prepared to fight, to carry through the necessary democratic changes to make the Labour Party fit for purpose as a class weapon in the struggle of the working class? Are they prepared to embrace forces like ourselves and others? This, by necessity, must be a federal form of organisation. No more top-down organisation. No little committees deciding who shall be a member or who shall be not. We should go back to the example of the Labour Party in its formation, which was open, which was federal. If the Co-op Party and Stella Creasy can be a member and can exist, and they've had a few slight problems, haven't they, of corruption, then what is the problem with the Socialist Party and others being incorporated without conditions into what is becoming essentially or potentially a new party? We have the new politics that Jeremy has spoken about. But the danger is this can be business as usual, the old politics. Then the accusation has been, well, you stood in elections. Yes, it's true. But why did we stand in elections? To continue the battle against austerity through Tusk. We didn't stand indiscriminately. We wrote letters and we're still doing it. If you're prepared to stand by the working class and not carry through cuts, and John MacDonald has hinted at this, by the way, in statements he's made in Scotland in the last couple of days, then of course that option will be reconsidered. But we are not prepared to join and collaborating in a party which is still attacking the working class. The candidate for Oldham, who's just been selected, has carried through horrendous cuts in Oldham, quite frankly. Is that the kind of Labour Party we want with the new politics? We are prepared to join and collaborate in building, through a rejuvenated Labour Party, a powerful new pole of attraction for the working class. But we have to be deadly realistic. The right are biding their time, sniping, preparing to sabotage and undermine Corbyn. Look at Frank Field. He says, if one Labour MP is deselected, then I intend to go out and canvass for him if he stands against the Labour Party. Could you have better proof than that? John Mann, who attacks Corbyn almost weekly in the pages of a newspaper column. There are many deficiencies in the political programme of Corbyn, which we could go into and no doubt will be discussed probably tomorrow night. But we have to be carried through, and the leaders have to carry through the promises on which they were elected, on tuition fees. They're inconsistent, for instance, on railway nationalisation. They propose that there should be every contract that runs out of the individual companies, then it should be taken into the public sector. But by the time a full parliament is completed, about half of the railways will be in the public sector. Don't fiddle. Don't take a halfway house position. Your raising to power in the leadership of the party was by a working people and by the youth who were looking for a fundamental change. Marxists are deadly realistic. The most fatal trait of a leadership is to have a policy of wishful thinking. To try and prettify the situation, you have to tell the truth. There's a very simple aphorism we observe. Say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done. And you know, Lenin once said, when he took power and he was wielding power, he was realistic about the situation in Russia. He said, we have the same old Tsarist state machine with a thin veneer of Bolshevism. The reality is, in the Labour Party today, we have the same old Blairite machine with a thin veneer of Corbynism. In fact, we have dual power, and an element of dual power in the Labour Party, with Corbyn and his office and the support of the masses outside, and the right still in control of the machine. So we welcome Corbyn's victory. We contributed to that victory. Suzanne, on the executive of Unite, Lenny McCluskey said we have to vote for Corbyn, but he was actually prepared to support Andy Burnham, because if we don't, people like Suzanne and the Socialist Party will gain, and therefore the idea of a new mass workers' party will be on the agenda. Remember what Thatcher said, and Chris has mentioned this, when in relation to what Norman Tebbit approached her and said, what is your greatest achievement? And she didn't say defeating Galtieri. She didn't even say defeating the miners. It was Tony Blair coming to power in the Labour Party. Why? Because they tried for 80 years to undermine what was a potential threat to them and their system. And in 1983, they had the same kind of attitude that Cameron has today. The witch hunt against us began in the tops of the Tory party itself, saying you must get rid of these Marxists. And that's what happened. They managed to achieve that, not through their own strength, not even through the objective position in society, but through the betrayal of ex-lefts. And as a result of that, the Labour Party moved towards the right. If Corbyn is thwarted by the right machine, he must not hesitate to take the forces around them outside, from which most of them came in the first place. The shell of the Labour Party would still exist, maybe in the hands of the right wing, but it wouldn't find a purchase within society at the present time. If we act in this way, we will lay the grounds for a really heroic struggle. I saw an item in the press this week of a young child. It was just quoted in a paper, just in passing. And this young child was about 7. And she was relating to a helper for a social worker. And the social worker said, well, have you eaten today? She said, well, I've had crisps. And sometimes I have a crisp butty, a crisp sandwich. And then what happens then? Well, what do you mean what happens then? Do you have tea? No, I have to go to bed. These are Dickensian conditions. Malnutrition, Victorian diseases that exist in the major cities of Britain today. They are as nothing compared to what I've seen and Jawad experiences in Pakistan or in India or the neo-colonial world. But all the gains in the past are being challenged. We have to lay the ground for a struggle to defend to the hilt the working class, establish socialism with democracy in Britain and worldwide. We live in an exciting era. Let us grasp all the new opportunities with both hands. Build a Socialist Party. Join our ranks. Help us to build a force which can transform Britain, Ireland, Pakistan, Europe and the world forward to a great democratic federation of the socialist states of the world.